green hell, grabs the low-hanging fruit among survival games and places the player smack dab in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. The place is known for its dizzying humidity and hostile locals, whether animals, plants, or humans, and the game will let players know that one way or another. It's best known as a rainforest simulator, especially if players crank up the difficulty level to how the developers intended. Players will need to attend to insect bites, numerous kinds of poison, and other jungle illnesses to find their missing wife in the story mode, or perhaps last as long as they can in the sandbox mode. It might not look as involved or as shocking as first-person zombie games due to the top-down, isometric perspective, but Project Zomboid can be more nerve-wracking. It's one of the toughest survival games out there due to the steep learning curve and the less forgiving enemies. Project Zomboid places a stalwart focus on realism and the sandbox nature of its world. The zombies also don't run, but they do come in frightening swarms that will punish any small mistake or indecision on the player's part. On top of that, players also have to deal with depression and boredom on top of their physiological needs. Much like Project Zomboid, 7 Days to Die is a definitive zombie survival experience, where players can roam around and create their own survival stories. Interestingly, it was released on early access at the same time as Project Zomboid. The difference is, 7 Days to Die presents a more intimate view of zombie slaughter. Thus it has more pronounced horror elements and the zombies look more visceral and distinct. Players can also craft some rather ridiculous melee weapons and try to MacGyver their way into survival, though that won't make the experience any less intimidating. If players want a simple survival game with Stone Age tendencies but modern equipment, then Subsistence is the game. There are no supernatural threats here, just the usual human doubt and greed. Players must defend themselves against wildlife, nature, and AI hunters who also behave the same way as they do. It's a pure sandbox setup where players can even build their own communities and develop their mini-communal civilizations. It's similar to Rust but with less wackiness and with more available modern technology. The game is also famed for its difficulty as it often tries to simulate real-world rules. If players want to get a taste of what it's like to have a similar predicament to Tom Hanks in Cast Away, then Stranded Deep is a good trial run. It's a game where players are stranded on an island, but they soon realize that they're not Polynesian islanders who are adept at surviving such environments, so this paradise might as well be hell. The worst part is that players are encouraged to leave their island, since their starting plot of land doesn't have all the resources available. Players will need to venture to other islands to complete their hierarchy of needs that would have been easy if not for the sharks and other violent sea critters looking for a meal. It's set in the modern world, but that doesn't mean this war of mine ceases to be as unforgiving as survival games that start with Stone Age tech. At its core, this war of mine is similar to The Sims, except all the Sims are in war-torn Eastern Europe, and they're all depressed and are a couple of missed meals away from dying. That's how bleak the situation is in this war of mine. Players are tasked with managing civilian survivors in a city under siege where every member must be kept alive. The problem is, some are better than others when it comes to certain tasks, and looters are everywhere, turning the whole city into a free-for-all. Kincher is a weird post-apocalyptic video game where Mad Max and anime had an unholy union and gave birth to the game's peculiar aesthetics. It's a sandbox survival title where players are allowed to do whatever they like in a world where frequent storms and giant anomalies can squish people-sized objects like bugs. In essence, Kinchi's developers consider it an RPG, but it's just so hilariously savage to its players that it can easily double as a survival game. Since gameplay is freeform, players can become merchants, traders, slavers, or just roamers. Of course, the strongest always survive in that kind of society, and that's where the bulk of Kinchi's survival experience lies. Don't be fooled by the simple and pop-up storybook art style. Don't starve means nasty business. The game pits players and the character of their choice against unknown and alien elements and creatures of a dreary Lovecraftian world where they must shore up their base defenses while also exploring for better opportunities to live. Don't Starve has a day and night cycle where the latter provides an intense challenge, since the dark makes the grotesque monstrosities bolder and hungrier. Part of the reason why the game's difficult is that it's also a roguelike. For players who want a winter apocalypse to see if they have a shot at surviving frostbite and hypothermia, then The Long Dark should more than satisfy or traumatize. It's another post-apocalyptic game where a geomagnetic disaster turned the whole world into a refrigerator. There are no zombies, monsters, or ghosts in The Long Dark. The only enemies are the sheer coldness of Mother Nature herself and her starving four-legged mammalian children. Players will have to manage not just their fitness, food, sleep, and hydration, but also their clothing and temperature. It's immersive enough that its players will likely feel their characters' spine-chilling predicaments. Rust is one of the oldest and most popular survival games that started as an early access title. It's now at its best state, and while the graphics and general gameplay have improved, the players remain mostly the same. Most are armchair social Darwinists and Machiavellians who wouldn't hesitate to shoot a kind stranger in the back if that meant a bit more loot for them. To that end, Rust fosters and rewards every kind of playstyle, be it hiding from social contact to piling up bodies in order to make a throne. The tribal mentality is rampant among players, and there's a high-risk, high-reward element in the form of rare loot. Arguably, this makes the game a lot of fun. Surviving in a post-apocalyptic DayZ universe is meant to be brutal, so thorough research of the game's fundamentals is recommended for beginners. Also, the fact that it has an insane learning curve should not be ignored if the player wants to be in control of their destiny among violent zombie hordes. After all, once the protagonist dies, the complete progress is lost because the game does not offer save or checkpoint options. Besides, everything in DayZ is learned through trial and error, which means there's a lot of room for mistakes since it has an enormous map full of enemies, infected or otherwise. With that in mind, detailed knowledge of it can definitely pay off, especially when it comes to searching for limited supplies. Scum initially looks more like a DayZ clone, but it's quickly setting itself apart by piling up mechanics that have turned it into the most complex Hunger Games simulator, but with zombies and mechs. Players will have to take care of their characters, as if they were taking care of their newborn kids here. Everything from macronutrients, micronutrients, defecation, urination, wetness level, and even musculature and body fat percentage has to be taken into account. Darkwood is a horror game and a survival game rolled into one nightmarish package. Because worrying about starvation isn't enough, players also have to worry about those creepy sounds and shapes at night. This all plays out from a top-down perspective. Even so, the fear and desperation are too palpable as Darkwood sets its own atmosphere masterfully. There are no quest markers or maps. Players have to commit locations to memory. Day areas are also randomly generated, so by night, players will know where to scramble back into once the initially static shadows start running toward them. Outward can be best described as Dark Souls, except players don't care about being a god and simply want to explore the wide open world because they got evicted by their greedy pig of a landlord. Except this world isn't pleasant, there's no map, their characters are lousy combatants, and monsters and bandits are everywhere. Outward is all about journeying on foot in a magical land where players are about as strong as the typical hapless NPC. There's also no traditional RPG progression here, and players will have to gauge their progress by how skillful or clever they have become. Think of Neo Scavenger as Civilization meets Dungeons and Dragons, except the setting is a city that's been turned into a trash bin of a ghetto and everyone is either a junkie or a hobo. Some of its players even resort to calling it Hobo Simulator. Turns out that kind of life isn't easy, as there's a high chance of getting shivved during the night by a random meth head. Neo Scavenger captures that atmosphere. The reason why it's hard is that there's too much RNG involved in fights, retreats, or just about anything. So even if players get too comfy by finding an iPad they can weaponize and having a garbage bag to cover their torso, the game's numerous enemies will still smoke them. Technically, Escape from Tarkov is a military simulation and battle royale game, where the objective of each session is to rush to the exfiltration zone without dying. But the obstacles players have to go through to achieve that can easily be turned into a Hollywood anti-war film where the protagonist dies. Escape from Tarkov has a combat system that's too realistic to be casually enjoyed. Thus its players are also sharp and shrewd, often taking their time and shooting others from behind. If players die, their stuff gets looted and they have to start from scratch, depending on which items they have insured. To that end, it can also be a lovely lesson about making wise decisions that can be applied in real life. If surviving a jet crash doesn't sound impossible enough, staying alive in a forest full of hungry cannibals afterward surely seems even more insufferable. No wonder the novices frequently complain, not only about the hard mode, but also about its single-player experience. There are too many hard-to-kill enemies and too little time for properly equipping the base. Besides, the game has a bit of a learning curve, which includes analyzing the surroundings, natives, and their routines along with gaining some combat skills. On the other hand, once the player meets the game's high standards, a terrifying adventure can become boring since there's no challenge left for the veterans except going on a casual killing spree or building elaborate, redundant structures. As in any other survival game out there, crafting, building, hunting, and exploration are also present in Ark Survival Evolved, but there's much more excitement to it. For example, being regularly eaten by raptors is an inevitable part of the game for every new player, until they learn how to tame or kill them. With that in mind, even figuring out the basics among the petrifying dinosaurs can be pretty stressful, while more experienced players are not so harmless either. That's why finding a safe area to spawn is one of the most important decisions for a newbie to patiently level up and get used to everything Ark has to offer. Subnautica is quite a popular video game, and you've likely already heard of it. This is a first-person survival game set in the future. Players crash down onto an aquatic planet, and you'll have to explore the ocean depths to find precious resources to fix up a rocket in hopes of making a return back home. You'll need to gather food, drinkable water, and make sure you're not low on oxygen at any given moment. However, like other games on this list, a good portion of Subnautica is crafting. You'll need to gather resources to craft up hubs, diving equipment, and watercrafts to explore the underwater depths further. With that said, there are hostile aquatic creatures out there that will do quick work in devouring you if you're not careful. Sons of the Forest is the sequel to the beloved survival horror title The Forest. This time, players are heading to a secluded island in search of a missing billionaire. However, upon arriving at the island, you will quickly discover that mutated cannibals inhabit it. As a result, you're actively trying to survive the elements and these hostile tribes. Players will first land on the island and build a structure to keep them safe. This means chopping down trees, creating a platform, walls, and even some fencing. However, you'll also need to ensure you're well equipped with weapons, as you'll soon find these cannibal hostiles bursting into the scene, wrecking your structures, and attempting to attack your group.